22nd of May 2023. This is another one of those what the fuck moments of mine. And in this one I want to talk about President Putin. Yes, I know I've done a Skidmark on it previously, but I want to do another one. This cannot be a 2-minute TikTok video because there is too much information that is related and interconnected. So if you really want to understand Putin better, as seen from the eyes of an observer, then this is for you. If you only want a few anecdotes, this is not for you. The reason I'm making this is that there are so many people that make all sorts of statements about President Putin and about his character and about the type of man that he is, and there's a lot of nonsense. This guy has been slandered by the Western media to such an extent that it's actually sickening. Here in South Africa, we've got this absolute crazy attitude from white Afrikaner people. They cannot support President Putin because the ANC and the EFF supports him. What bullshit is that? So that means that you cannot buy, if you're a white Afrikaner, you won't buy Kentucky Fried Chicken because the black people likes it as well. What type of argument is that? So you won't drive a BMW because the ANC uses BMWs. You won't drive a Nissan because the EFF likes it. It's absolutely crazy to talk like that. The fact that Putin is popular among so many people, that is what should tell you a story. And that is what you should think about. Most of the Putin haters tells you he is brutal, an autocrat, corrupt, he kills his opponents, and there are people here in South Africa, crazy people, that tells you he's a communist. Where they get their information from, I don't know. I just don't know. There was an interview that he did, and the journalist asked him about the USSR collapse, and he said, the collapse of the USSR was a tragic incident. And the main reason why it was tragic is that millions of Russians went to bed and woke up the next morning homeless in other countries, no longer part of Russia. And that was a tragedy. And he said that Russians must understand he sees himself as the president of all Russians on earth. He also said it is only a crazy person that would try to reconstitute the USSR. Now, there's many people that makes that statement that Putin is trying to rebuild the USSR. They don't know what they're talking about. If you look what NATO and the EU is doing, they're actually building a type of a USSR, a USSR. That's it. And if you look at what's going on in the EU at this point in time, the way that the EC and Ursula von der Crazy is running the show for the whole of Europe. The EC is nothing other than the Politburo. So the European Union, is much more and a closer resemblance of a communist regime than what the modern Russia is. But let's leave it there. Putin grew up in a very poor family and experienced poverty and food shortages as a youngster. He started his career as a clerk in St. Petersburg municipality and rapidly rose and was noticed by Moscow. He was recruited into the KGB and he served in Eastern Germany. He worked closely to Yeltsin, and this is where he gained first-hand experience of how treacherous the West was, and saw how Yeltsin basically gave Russia to the corrupt Western corporations. He witnessed the emergence of the oligarchs, massive plundering of state assets, massive unemployment, extreme poverty, food scarcity, an explosion of crime and gangsterism and corruption. His election as president after Yeltsin stunned the world. At that stage, he was basically unknown. Now I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to show you a few slides. Look at this image. He was laying a wreath at the memorial for soldiers that died in World War II, and they call it the Patriotic War. Look at the weather. Look at him. He is soaked to the bone where he stands there. And I listened to an interview where a journalist asked him specifically about this incident. And she said to him, "Why did you stand in the rain like that without an umbrella or anything?" And his reply hit me hard. And he said to her, "The soldiers that we are commemorating there, they fought and died in the trenches under horrific conditions. Conditions that you cannot really describe. So, he feels that it is right for him to endure that discomfort for a few minutes in their memory." And then he quipped, "And by the way, I'm not made of sugar." And that is a classic Putin. Now look at this image. Putin is very fond of children, and he cares a lot about children. I listened to an interview where they asked him about the issues in the Donbass. That was before the special military operation. And he discussed with the journalist the issue of the abduction of so many women out of the Donbass for prostitution and all types of slavery. And then he talked about the children. And he told her about how many children are being abducted there for the pedophiles, for organ harvesting, and adrenochrome harvesting. And when he spoke about the children, I watched his face. He's a guy that usually is fairly unemotional when he talks. But when he talked about the children, he was really getting emotional. And I remember so clearly, I turned my chair and I looked at my wife and I said to her, "Listen to that guy. He's going to fuck those Ukrainians up." In any case, then there was another instance. We've all seen many videos of him in the Kremlin and so, and in that office complex, usually he comes out of his office and then he walks through a hall and then he goes to wherever he has to go. And I saw a video where he was coming out of his office and there were people in the hall there. And a little girl ran up to him and started talking to him. And he went down on his haunches and he talked back to her. And the next he stood up and he called one of his assistants. And the assistant out and came back with a small table and 2 chairs and children's play tea set. And he went and he sat at the table with her, and she poured him some tea. And he sat there and he drank the tea with her. And the commentator said, at that point he was already 15 minutes late for a meeting. But that was him. Spent time with that girl, that little girl, which he didn't know. It's not family of his, nothing. That is the type of guy that he is. And on the other instance, I saw where he was walking up to a podium, but it was a hell of a long stretch of carpet that he had to cover, and there were people on both sides in their chairs, but they were all standing. And as he walked up, he was nodding and acknowledging and shaking a hand here and there. And when he was almost at the end, the guy took his hand and pulled him closer and said something to him. And he turned around and he walked back about halfway down the passage to a woman that was standing, and she had dark glasses on. And when he got to her, he took her hand, and as he took her hand, she took her other hand and she started feeling his face. And then he hugged her, you know, like they do, the Europeans do it also, and turned around and walked back. The woman was blind. And those are the things that I see. You must understand, I've done a lot of research on him because he's an impressive man. He is the president that every Western country actually deserves, because he cares about his country and he cares about his people. Look at this image. I'm just showing it. Look at that. The way he stands and the way he's got Obama by the tie. That picture says a lot. His election as a president after Yeltsin stunned the world. At that stage he was basically unknown. The Russia that Putin inherited was a mess. Crime and corruption was everywhere. 35,000 so-called contract killings per year with very little justice for the victims. The crime cartels were everywhere and the government services were deeply corrupted. Sounds a lot like South Africa. Now, try and imagine being in his position. His country was in the sewer. The easy way out would have been to join the club and carry on, like we've seen here. Many expected that, but they did not understand the depth of his patriotism. To him, Russia and the Russians were number one. Now we get the accusation that he was brutal. He knew that he must get the crime and corruption under control, and he established a security unit that he staffed with super loyal ex-KGB people that he could trust. This would later develop into the FSB. This was the unit that he had to do the cleanup of crime and corruption, and they had very little constraints or restraints. They had a job to do and had to deal with extremely violent gangs and cartels. In a way, it was a war. Although shocking in the beginning, they mowed the kingpins down. This is most probably where he got the reputation of being brutal. The result became visible rapidly, and ordinary Russians took notice. At the same time, he took aim at the Western corporations that were plundering the resources. They were shutting industry down and exported the raw materials to the West, causing massive unemployment and subsequent poverty. Now, Putin was asked by a journalist just when the first batch of sanctions was issued by the West against Russia. And the journalist asked him, why don't you close the gas flow off to Europe? And he said to her, if I do that, millions of Europeans are going to lose their jobs. Millions of them will find themselves facing poverty and hunger. And I have seen what that means. And I will not do it to the people of Europe. I haven't got a fight. My fight is not with the citizens of Europe. My fight is with their leadership. And I thought to myself, why doesn't the Western media publish things like that? But you will never hear it. The state has lost the bulk of its income due to the privatization. And the Yeltsin and the oligarchs was born. As I mentioned in another skidmark of mine, all oligarchs are not evil. They fall basically in two groups. You've got the capitalist oligarchs, and they are really like vultures and hyenas. And then you get your nationalist oligarchs. They take the opportunities that they see, but they work those opportunities. The first group was Putin's prime targets. Another accusation is that Putin is corrupt and got filthy rich from his corruption. It is a fact that he is extremely wealthy. But he did not get wealthy from stealing from the state, as the vast majority of the political leaders do. And we know that. We see that here in South Africa. These embattled oligarchs desperately tried to win his friendship, and they endowed him with goods and opportunities, primarily to try and be in his good books. It was a mistake. In showering him with gifts, they revealed their own corrupt practices, and he nailed them. The nationalist oligarchs took note and began to work with Putin, and in a way started protecting him. And this is where that story is coming from, that the oligarchs is keeping him in power. The capitalist oligarchs were feeling the heat, and there was that now almost famous meeting with the oligarchs in one of the industrial cities. And that was, I enjoyed that video a lot. They planned to shut all the factories down and move production to the West. Some factories were already shut down. So Putin called them for a meeting on site. They were in a little room there with a table, and all those factory owners were sitting around the table. And he gave them, well, he was short and sweet. He gave them two options. One, they restart all the factories and re-employ all the workers. Or two, he nationalized everything and the state runs the factories. They went for option one. And that was where that incident is, where there was a document sent around for everyone to sign, and it came back to him, and he started, and he checked it, and he looked at the signatures, and he looked up, and he pointed at the one guy sitting there. And he said, you didn't sign. Come here. And he gave him the paper, and he gave him his pen. And the guy signed and walked away, and Putin called him back and said, bring back my pen. That is the type of incidents that you see, and if you are a keen observer, it makes an impression on you. So they took option two, but they hated him for it. Next step, Putin instructed hyper audits of the oligarchs involved. This led to many of them departing to the West with as much of their accumulated wealth as possible. So the baseless accusation that Putin is in the pockets of the oligarchs is what it is, baseless. He actually hates them. When the Western sanctions started and Russian assets were confiscated all over the world by the West, a journalist asked him about the confiscation of the assets of the oligarchs, and he responded, "They plundered Russia and committed treason. Now their adopted countries are punishing them. I have nothing more to say." To Putin, the confiscation of the oligarchs' assets was a blessing in disguise, because by doing it, the West broke any hold that these oligarchs still had over the Russian economy. Putin also nationalized most of the oil and gas into SOEs, with private shareholders included. People like to say that Putin is part of the WEF, because the WEF listed him as a young leader and he attended a meeting in Davos. Well, take note of this. He nationalized the central bank and threw the Rothschilds out of Russia. He banned all Soros-related NGOs, and a warrant of arrest, dead or alive, was issued for Soros. He banned GMO plants and seeds. No GMO is allowed in food production. Monsanto is not allowed to operate in Russia. And on that point, it will be interesting to see what's going to happen now in the Donbass, because most of the agricultural land that Monsanto owns is in the Donbass, which is now Russia. I wonder if there's going to be a lands claim court. I would like to see that one. Now look at this slide. This is what Putin did for Russia in his first 15 years. 15 years of Putin. How Russia has changed in the last 15 years since Vladimir Putin came into power. In 1999, the nominal GDP was $195 billion. In 2013, it was $2,113 billion. GDP, $1.32 billion. Inflation was 36.5%, dropped down to 6.5%. Gold reserves was $12.6 billion, and it grew to $511 billion. That is a massive growth. Debt of the government, it was 78% of BBN. Debt of the government in 2013, 8% of BBN. Pensions were 499 rubles, and in 2013 it was 10,000 rubles. Salaries was 1,522 rubles, and it grew to 29,940. But here comes some interesting fact. In 2000, he created the union with Belarus. In 2001, signed a partnership deal with China. 2002, Russia became a country with a market economy. There you go, you guys that accuse him of being a communist. And then there's a lot of other interesting things that happened. In 2005, Russia entered the list of countries with a high level of human development. 2008, Russia survived the financial crisis better than other countries. In 2011, created the Eurasian Union. 2013, became the largest economy in Europe. And those are a few things that Putin did for Russia in his first 15 years. The bottom line is simply this. Putin is the type of president that every country needs. The left hates him because he has zero tolerance for the liberal nonsense. Putin protects families and religion. He does not tolerate any discrimination of race or culture. He's a pragmatist and an excellent strategist. He's a qualified lawyer and is always insisting that the law must be followed. That is why he is so vehemently opposed to this so-called rules-based order of the West. He says they make the rules and the rest of the world must follow. And the rules doesn't apply to them. And they change the rules to suit their situation. That is the big thing. Look at his conduct in public. He's never rude to journalists. Actually, he's friendly with them and he makes jokes with them. He always treats people with respect. Putin haters are all suspects in my mind. Every decent conservative will owe Putin. In February 2022, he said loud and clear to the globalists, this is where you stop. And I'm going to show you a few more slides. This was something that he said at a meeting in St. Petersburg. Europe's green transition and climate fight careens into the ditch without cheap Russian gas and oil. Decades of central planning by climate technocrats falls apart like a house of cards. And Europe is back embracing coal. And then there was this. Yes, Donbass, which provided Ukraine 80% of its entire GDP per year, contains trillions in natural resources. The Zionist Rothschilds literally banked on obtaining the Donbass after genociding its citizens. And the Zot, Western leaders, were so compromised by forcing taxpayers to pay for it. That is something to keep in mind. And then here it is for those guys that say he's part of the WEF. In 2015, Jacob Rothschild accused Putin of being a traitor to the New World Order. Let that sink in. And then we have this. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced on Russian television that the New World Order has collapsed, claiming that the world is now the latest contraction to the death of the elite regime. Putin told Russian broadcast NTV that the new global world order has failed due to the awakening of people around the world who have come to realize the insidious truth about the elite's plans. The best is yet to come. And then there was that meme up in here, don't worry America, I got this. And here's the image of Putin. He's a keen biker. And he rides a lot with the Moscow Motorbike Club. And then I've got this for you. I don't always invade Ukraine, but when I do, it's to take out the NWO's bioweapon labs, child trafficking and money laundering main hub while exposing the Biden, Clinton, Kerry, Obama, Romney and Pelosi crime families' decades-long corruption, and liberate the Ukrainian people. Let that sink in. And I've got a few more things I want to tell you. I listened to a debate where there was a Russian woman part of the debate, and there was a journalist in the debate, and the journalist made the accusation that Putin was brutal. And the Russian woman said to her, it was a woman journalist as well, said to her, gave her a quick explanation as I did earlier about the crime situation in Russia when he became president. And she said to the journalist, do you think he could have gotten that criminal syndicates, which were ruthless killers, under control by giving them pamphlets and literature? Look at King David in the Bible. He is honored by everyone. But look at his history. How many people did he have to kill? for the safety of his nation. And that journalist couldn't respond. And then I want to give you this. Putin has these press club meetings every now and then, and he normally do them in Valdai. And I watched one afternoon, I watched the thing, and he made his speech. He was talking for about 30 minutes. And then he sat down, and there was about 100 journalists in the room. And he started facing questions from them. And they asked, and he answered, and so forth. And then at this point, the moderator said, okay, one more question, then we are done, after 3 hours. And Putin said, what? I am in charge here. We will sit here until all the questions are done. That Q&A went on for 4.5 hours. Show me one Western leader that can do it. Biden can't even face 2 minutes. So, that is the type of guy that he is. He knows what's going on in the world and in his country, and he is not scared to face the press. He's not scared to face them. He does it frequently. He's got this thing that he goes to schools, and then he sits down in the classroom with the students, and they can ask him questions. He does that frequently. Show me another president that do that. Most of them don't even face their own constituents. And here's something interesting. Putin prepared Russia for this Western sanction stuff. And after the Nord Stream pipelines were blown up, he issued a decree in which every Russian company that used cloud-based services for their data storage had to make sure that the servers on which their data is hosted was inside the borders of Russia. Because he said, if they can blow up that Nord Stream, they can just as easily cut the underseas communication cables, and everything in the West will collapse if that happens. So Russia's data is contained inside Russia. They've also got their own app store, they've got their own version of Facebook, because he threw Facebook out of Russia. And the thing is that he wanted the Russian businesses to make sure that their stuff is inside the borders of Russia. I saw last night they're now busy with a SIM card project where the company that is printing the PC boards and stuff for the military will be making SIM cards now, because they feel that they are vulnerable with the SIM cards if they got to get it from another country all the time. That is things that he did. And I'm going to show you this slide last. He made abortion illegal after 12 weeks, stopped CNN, stopped Facebook, built 30,000 churches, taking on the LGBTQ. Once Soros dead or alive, it is obvious why the left wants you to hate him. And I'm going to say it again. Make sure that you are sure of your facts before you accuse Vladimir Putin of things that has been fed to you by this corrupt Western media. I hope you enjoyed this and find it of value, and tell me in the comments. If you don't agree, I don't care. And take note. I don't want to claim that things are chronologically correct, that everything is in detail. I am not a guy that investigated and has contact with Putin to the extent that I would like to write an autobiography for him as a ghostwriter or that. I have spoken about the things that I observed. And it is my opinion, this is my opinion of Putin. And this is what I saw when I started digging deeper, because I'm one of those guys that comes from a generation here in South Africa where we were pumped every day about the Red Danger, and we were pumped to hate communists, and the media made sure that we never realized that Russia changed, and we never got proper information about Putin. We only saw the reflections that the Western media and the cabal wanted us to see. Please give me a like and subscribe and share the thing. Thank you.